So hi everybody, my name is Jerome Billeter. I'm the corporate business manager at the Housing Lin. So I'm very excited to welcome you to the fourth session of our autumn-winter series of happy hours today. Our happy hours are our free regular webinars, which are made possible by the support of the UKRI. So in today's sessions, we're going to discuss the broad subject of collaborative housing and care solutions. We've got a fantastic panel of researchers and experts today who are going to discuss co-housing and relational care more generally. And we've got speakers from UK Co-Housing Network, the University of Bristol, Faith in Society, and the Open University. So collaborative housing is a term that refers to a wide range of different housing models. So for example, co-housing, housing cooperative, self-managed retirement developments. And, essentially, this means that residents of a collaborative housing scheme must be in control of their housing. All decisions are taken by the residents with no external agency, having a say in who might live in the community or what services are used. Supporters of collaborative housing believe that it might be a more supportive and caring of environment to live in as we get older, when compared to other later life housing options, giving residents independence and control over how we live in later life. But really enough from me. I will let our speakers do the talking. And I will now hand over to our first speaker, Maria Brenton, who's a senior co-housing ambassador and founder of the New Ground co-housing community in High Barnet, who will speak about informal care in co-housing community and about the New Ground co-housing scheme in High Barnet in particular. A bit more about Maria. Maria is involved in the UK Co-Housing Network in promoting the senior co-housing model as a choice for older people planning for a convivial old age living, independently, autonomously, and companionably. New Ground in North London, which was the subject of a previous Housing Lin case study and a blog by Maria, is the UK's first senior and women-only co-housing community. Maria has visited co-housing communities in the USA and across Europe, and is a former trustee of Care and Repair England, as well as a former advisor for GLA Community-Led Housing Hub. Right, over to you, Maria.
Hello, everybody, and hello to all friends. I'm one of the founders of New Ground, I have to say. The women who created New Ground intended to function as a neighbourly community. So they spent considerable time and care before they ever moved in 2016 to create a sense of community, to build cohesion, and to agree a core set of shared values. They wanted to stay in charge of their own lives and to keep a sense of autonomy and agency among them. And their motto became, "We shall not be done unto." One of the workshops that I worked on with them at an early stage was on the boundaries of care. They worked on values of co-responsibility and mutuality and ran group sessions on what this would mean and where the boundaries should be. So that eventually they came to the very simple statement, which often visitors to New Ground hear: we look out for each other, not after each other. So from the very beginning, each member of New Ground, there are 26 women there, each one has undertaken to take responsibility for her own formal care arrangements, either directly or via a proxy. Everyone has agreed and set up powers of attorney, and house keys, GP, and next of kin details are all held centrally. Additionally, over time, the group has arranged for itself training sessions from professionals around dementia and disability. So the New Ground group is very careful to keep a line between the mutual support that they offer each other and the formal care services, so as, first of all, not to overburden themselves, and also to not let the formal services use them as an excuse not to provide services, or in other words, to dump on them. So the mutual support system that they have evolved over the last 6 or 7 years is quite dependent on keeping the age range of New Ground viable. And there's a 36-year age gap between the youngest and the oldest at the moment, so they're not doing too badly. But it is a matter to keep in focus as the group goes on. All those women, except for one couple, lived alone, scattered around London before New Ground was developed. And what they wanted to do was to grow neighborliness and reciprocity on the understanding that one day you may be giving care, the next day you may be receiving it. Now, if you look at what most older people actually need, except when they're gravely ill, their needs are fairly simple ones for informal care and security. A major concern of older people living alone, and a major worry for their families, is that no one would notice if they don't get up one morning or they don't appear at all, and that no one will go in and investigate. When I was doing research in the Netherlands, a constant response from older people that I talked to as a reason for living in co-housing was, I won't be left lying behind my door for weeks and nobody notices. And that's a real fear among older people living alone. If you think about the hundreds and hundreds of fit for discharge but lives alone older people occupying hospital beds here in the UK, they are a huge problem for the NHS. Now, the background here, as you all well know, is cuts in social care services, a poor system of social care in the first place that needs reform and has been neglected, the poor remuneration of care workers, a scarcity of care workers since Brexit. But it is also often the non-availability of simple informal care in places where older people don't know their neighbours. So there are 101 small things that enable an older person to be released home from hospital. Someone to keep an eye on them, basically. Bring a meal, walk the dog, do some shopping, fetch a prescription, keep them company. All this mutual support is available at New Ground. And since COVID, it has been strengthened and systematized. Now, when COVID lockdown happened, the group already had a health buddy system, but they have stepped it up. When lockdown happened, they discussed and instituted via Zoom policies to protect New Ground from COVID. No external visitors, no meeting except in established internal bubbles, regular sanitizing all handrails and door handles, outdoor keep fit classes 2 meters apart, play reading groups via Zoom, memoir writing group via Zoom, etc. All kinds of measures to relieve the isolation that lockdown imposed on all of us. Since COVID, the New Ground system has been strengthened so that everyone now has at least 2 health buddies to look out for them. Those people will accompany you to an outpatient's appointment if you need it, fetch things for you, liaise with others on your behalf, etc. I want to give you just 3 examples of the way that this system has worked. One I'm taking from at least 10 years ago, before the group ever moved into a new building, and they were scattered across 12 London boroughs. Alette, who was having a heart operation, found that her hospital consultant was reluctant to discharge her home because she lived alone, and he wanted to keep her in for 3 weeks. She appealed to the rest of the women's group for help. And for those 3 weeks, from all over London, they operated a rota of sleeping over, shopping, cooking, keeping her company, as an alternative to all that time in an expensive hospital bed. And that's what would happen today in New Ground. Jude, who's listening to this program, recently broke her shoulder and would tell you that she immediately had all kinds of assistance on offer from the community in terms of meals, shopping, prescriptions, journeys to outpatients appointments or whatever. A more telling example of the mutual support that is available at New Ground was the first death that the community has experienced in November last year of Shirley Meridine, one of the key founders of New Ground. In her case, she died at home peacefully, and the community operated what they would describe as the 3 circles of care. Shirley, her 2 sons, and Sue and Sheila, her buddies, her health buddies, were the first part of that circle. Sue and Sheila kept the rest of the community informed about Shirley so that there weren't, too many people pounding on the door trying to find out. And they were also the liaison for New Ground with the medical and nursing professionals who came in and out. And that worked beautifully. And Shirley, if she were here today, would say that was what she intended to happen, and she'd be very proud. So today there are women who are unwell at New Ground. Some have care workers coming in. Others have support from buddies. For those who are vulnerable, buddies have evolved systems for checking on them each morning without being too intrusive. And the community is also kept well informed. Now, only today I read on an email, because I don't live in New Ground, an email told me that a group of the women at New Ground have just done training in first aid and using defibrillators. And the community is taking on the decision to purchase a defibrillator for the whole community, and one that might be available for people in the street if necessary. So this is a group that's well organized, has taken a lot of trouble to anticipate issues and problems, has taken advantage of as much training as they could get, and also have a very clear idea of that they're there to look out for each other, not after each other, which is the job of the health and social care services. So I hope that has given you a good picture of this lovely group of women. And we can move on to Jim's research, which includes New Ground.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Maria, for this presentation, for setting the scene for the other speakers. So without further ado, we're gonna move to Jim. I'm just gonna introduce Jim first, but I also would like to remind our audience, please make sure to post lots of questions in the Q&A box. That will really help create an interesting conversation at the end of the session. So now we are going to take a look at collaborative housing in both informal and formal models, where the emphasis is on maintaining control of one's own environment, with Jim Hudson. So Jim is a senior research associate at the University of Bristol. He's a researcher with a focus on the social dimensions of community-led housing, in particular models of collaborative housing created by and for older people, and the potential of such models to address issues around social care needs. So Jim is going to present today on the CHIC project, which stands for Collaborative Housing and Innovation in Care. And it's a study funded by the National Institute of Health Research School for Social Care Research. The project's broad aim is to explore the ways in which collaborative housing might help meet the changing needs of older people. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Jerome. How's my sound? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, perfect.
Sure. So that's good. I can skip my first couple of comments here. I was going to explain the Chic project in very brief outline, but I think you've already covered that. And also, as Maria has noted, there's quite an overlap here. We've been working on the Chic project now for 2.5, getting on 3 years, of which 2.5 of those has been a kind of deep dive with 6 collaborative housing groups, one of which, as Maria says, is New Ground itself. And she's already given a fantastically rich impression of some of the mutual support and social support across the group and how that's worked. So I'll kind of say less about Ouch and New Ground and a bit more about some of the others. So as has been said, the overall question for the research was in what ways or to what extent can collaborative housing meet the changing needs of older people in terms of care and social care. We phrase it as social care because our funders are directed that way, but I'm keen to emphasize that when I use the term social care or care, I mean it in a much wider sense than paid for personal care in its narrower sense. And just to talk briefly about so we had 3 co-housing groups. Only Ouch was an explicitly senior co-housing group, in large part because that's the only one in the UK that is currently established. The other 2 groups were a so-called intergenerational group, and I guess both of the other 2 were really, but the third group tended to be older members, although not exclusively. And as Maria's already said, co-housing as a model is not about providing hands-on care, but creating a kind of a place where the residents, the members, have agency in later life and enjoy the mutual support of their fellow co-housers. And we did. Let me just. Oh, I can't seem to get the slide to move on here. There we go. Oh, yeah. So there's a snapshot of the 3 co-housing schemes. We've agreed anonymity even with the other 2 groups, although anybody who knows the co-housing scene in the UK will probably know those, be able to identify those others fairly easily. But what I did want to talk about in more depth actually was beyond the very valuable examples that Maria's given. We went a little bit deeper to try and kind of quantify and represent those some of those situations. This is one case that was not rare, in fact, at one of the other 2 groups when a member fell ill. In this particular case of Eric, not his real name, unfortunately terminally ill. And we were, because of the length of our piece of research, we were able to take this deep dive and witness, in some cases in real time, and engage with residents as some of these situations occurred. In this particular case for Eric, he fell ill and was diagnosed with lung cancer at that awful time, very early in the first lockdown in 2020. So some of this data we learned retrospectively. But what we noted, and there were cases of this in all 3 of the co-housing groups, was how within the wider group there were individuals who stepped up either as Maria's already mentioned, as part of a kind of formal agreed buddy system, or sometimes it was just neighbours or people who were closest within a group who would step up. And I think what you could describe these situations are as or what we're calling them, is a kind of advocacy or intermediary role that the individuals play. Sometimes because it's a role that an adult child might play in terms of health support, and that person is either not close by geographically, or it's somebody who doesn't have children. But it's speaking personally as well from recent experience, I think it's a huge piece of unseen work, especially by adult children, around organising carers, liaising with other family members and carers, health services, and more than that, kind of understanding the whole of the disparate and fast failing system of social care in the UK, or in England at least. So we carefully took apart the situations around individuals and looked at who did what. It was interesting in this situation that Eric's son, who lived abroad, wasn't able immediately to come and support his father, but when he did come over to the UK, where he was unfamiliar with the place and the social care system, the group was also able to rally around and support him with meals and advice and emotional support as well as his dad. And we were really keen to find this would have been the golden bullet, really, examples where the group had enabled members to come back from hospital earlier than they otherwise might have done. We couldn't quite nail that one. What we did find was that hospitals and health services would set up care and support for a member returning home, only to find that care and support and organisation wasn't really needed so much. So they were able to step back much more quickly than they otherwise would have done. And I did want to speak, I'm just checking the time, very briefly about what we're calling the others, really, these three other schemes that are not co-housing, in that they're not intentional communities as such. With co-housing, members have come together, had a hand in designing and creating the scheme, and have made this commitment to being and maintaining a sociable community. But we were aware as we began this research that there were some other quite interesting schemes that did come under this umbrella term of collaborative housing, in that they're housing schemes and they're self-managed by their residents at a level that counts. I'm not able to say the real names of the communities, but we've got quite a range, even in the three case studies that we looked at. The first one, just on the left there, was actually a retirement scheme built in the late 90s by the retirement company McCarthy and Stone. Might be booze in the background. They're no longer the freeholder. That was long sold on, but about 15, 20 years ago, the resident leaseholders, all the apartments that are leasehold there, started to get fed up with the poor performance of the freeholder, both in terms of maintenance of the building, but also the services they had there, the site manager who lived on site. So they decided, under a legal right to manage, to take control of that scheme. And although the freeholder still owns the bricks and mortar, they're pretty much absent now, and the leaseholders are able to manage. The second one at the top there, actually the one at the bottom right, is a housing co-op for older people, one of only two that we're aware of in the UK. If you know of more than two, do get in touch. But the advantages of that particular scheme were apparent almost immediately to us in these three self-managed schemes. The third one, by the way, is a scheme that's kind of similar to Extra Care, but self-managed by its leaseholder residents through a company from the very beginning. But the case in all three of these is perhaps less subtle and more direct than the advantages of co-housing, but they have full control over their housing. The example that was most striking, the housing co-op, which is in the southeast of Liverpool, used to be a part of a bigger housing development, the rest of which was managed for older people by a housing association. A few years back, they withdrew their warden services and other management services and put everything on the end of a phone line. But the co-op who had shared those services made the decision to go it alone and worked out a way financially of keeping that site warden and that kind of day-to-day looking out for, as well as other management services that others around them had lost. And indeed, the co-op has continued to be the hub of that whole wider community, especially for many people who don't realise that it's no longer part of that wider housing scheme. And the third scheme is the only one of the three that actually provides a level of care service. It's care registered in that sense, and is able to manage the degree of those services. At present, they keep them fairly limited, but they have the potential, as CQC registered, to step up those services as and when they need it. It's tailored to their own members' needs. So I would say overall, it's very tempting as researchers to kind of ask a research question and then try and nail down a very precise and exact answer and say, well, you should do X, Y, and Z, and this is how it's going to work. I think we've learned a lot from all 6 of those schemes, and we've learned many different things. When we put the idea to the co-housing schemes that there might be a way of collaborating to actually bring on board a social and any sort of specific care services, there was a kind of lukewarm response, and we did wonder whether something of the sense of agency and self-managed community is lost when you kind of build in care systems. It's something that we're still talking over as we start to write our academic papers at the moment. I think what is important, though, is to recognise that all of these different models, which are kind of like a sort of ecosystem of different options, really, all have key advantages. They all have different disadvantages. One of those being that obviously if you self-manage your life and your housing scheme, there's a lot of work involved in that. Everybody at all the schemes spent quite a lot of their time going to meetings and not always agreeing about the best thing to be done, especially financially. But I think there's key things that we can pull out of these in terms of moving forward to our next stage and final stage with the research of reporting on policy guidance. And I think what we need to recognise is the many advantages of each of these very different schemes, and compare them not so much to each other, but to the other few and disadvantaged options in later life, the main one of which is simply remaining in your own home, isolated and alone. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. So yeah, we look forward to update our members on the progress on this project. Thank you for our audience members who've asked a few questions. So we're going to answer these questions in the end of at the end of the session. So we're now going to move on to our last presentation of the day with Jenny Kartoupelis. So Jenny is an author and director of Faith in Society, which is a charity which vision is to promote improved community cohesion through better understanding and cooperation between people of different religions, those of no faith, and secular society in the United Kingdom. Jenny started her career in public relations and has expertise in developing and creating partnerships across sectors and boundaries, public, private, faith, and voluntary. In 1998, while still running her own PR business, she was invited by faith leaders to help establish a regional multi-faith body, and for her work as its director, she was awarded the MBE for services to interfaith relations. Since 2015, Jenny has given much of her time to research into the care of older people. Her work has resulted in 2 books about the theory and practice of relational care. In today's presentation, Jenny is going to discuss the Open University research, the value and practice of relational care with older people. It's a project aimed to extend existing knowledge about relational care, enabling recognition of its presence and identifying what supports its practice with older people. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jerome, and hello to everyone. So we've heard 2 presentations that I think many of us will really relate to. I know I did as I listened to them. Maria's spoken about intentional communities of people coming together in co-housing to support one another, doing so through their own choice and choosing their company. Jim's looked at collaborative housing in both informal and formal models, some where there's a regulatory input. And there the emphasis is on maintaining control of one's own environment. In both cases, our speakers have talked about the importance of agency. And of course, relationships and the way they operate inevitably play a key role in this. But what happens when care takes place in a so-called reluctant community? When older people, or perhaps their loved ones, decide that they'll be safer in sheltered housing, extra care, or even residential accommodation. There may be, if you're lucky, a choice about when and where to move, although not always, when these transitions can happen during times of crisis. But in any case, there will be very little choice of the people with whom one is going to live. So we've heard about the value of relationships, which are formed in a familiar way, a way that we form our own friends, our own family and community bonds through choice, friendship, a gentle time of getting to know and trust the other, in a setting where everyone can pull together, and through supporting each other, find a purpose in life. The question is, how do we nurture such beneficial relationships in more formal structures of care, from extra care, for example, to residential, so that they too can benefit from this type of natural social interaction? Our work at the Open University, with my teammates, Dr. Gopinath, who's here today, and Professor Larkin, who couldn't be with us, and who are a real delight for me to work with. So our work indicates that this state of affairs, the benefiting from good relationships that we've already seen in Maria and Jim's presentation, can to a large extent be replicated in the so-called reluctant community, creating greater happiness for all concerned by applying the concept of relational care, a concept which is based on the premise that humans are naturally interdependent and that the great majority thrive in environments where they can form and sustain natural relationships. So just briefly taking a step back in time, if we look back at early attempts by the state to provide some sort of safety net, we see the egregious workhouse of the 19th century. This was institution-centred, with its practices focused on keeping the institution going while salving the national conscience. The inmates, and they were inmates, were consequently disempowered and demeaned. This really grim state of affairs was increasingly challenged by the move to person-centred care over the 20th century, a much more enlightened approach, but nevertheless focusing on the recipients of care having more control over their own well-being rather than on their wider role in society, as contributors to others and to their community. So whilst person-centred care is a real leap forward and has many benefits, it does have a potential downside. It can result in seeing individuals as a collection of needs to be met, so inadvertently bringing disempowerment, and most importantly, loss of agency and loss of self-worth. If we're naturally interdependent, then for our own sense of value, there is a real need to serve others as well as to be served. The concept of relational care recognizes this mutuality and hence questions the primacy of independence and the person-centered approach. It's therefore an overarching concept that necessarily requires a purposeful change in attitude, bringing about the favorable practical changes that are needed, and so creating a beneficial circle. What does this concept have to offer supported housing? One of the main issues is to consider the type of community that the housing development will create. Is it one where mutual support can happen naturally and organically, or is it a more formal care going to be introduced into this housing development? Once care and support become more formalized and separated out from an organic community, they risk becoming primarily transactional, regardless of the housing setting. And once the focus moves to the transactional, then the risks of ageism, disempowerment, and isolation become greater. In 2 books published over the last 5 years, I've attempted to describe rather than define relational care, looking at how it's expressed in exemplary settings representing a range of accommodation, basing my studies on listening to the voices of older people, their families, carers, and providers, with around 150 in-depth interviews. Examining the evidence for beneficial change and listening directly to those involved helps to reveal the critical factors that are involved. These include trust, love, and autonomy, enabling everyone to contribute and to be involved in decisions. But my ideas were based on observation, not empirical research. The Open University Seminal Research Project, funded by the Hallmark Foundation, enables us to take these original observations much further forward. We've defined the 3 key requirements for the success of relational care as being an atmosphere of respect, trust, and inclusivity that nurtures a neighborhood of belonging, a purposeful focus on relationships in the way that the development is run and integrated into its locality. And thirdly, a physical environment that facilitates relationships. And I think that reflects what we've seen in the first 2 presentations and about how those intentional communities actually work. We've even created a toolkit to help people meet these requirements and to spread good practice into the reluctant community. Our toolkit uses a series of short vignettes, each illustrated with drawings showing the value of practices. Can I have the first slide here, please? Practices such as a home-like environment. And you'll see here that we've actually got a bit of emphasis on animals as well, because relationships with animals are also quite important. Well, actually very important. This next slide, please. Gosh, I do feel like Chris Whitty. Cultivating a sense of belonging. Everyone must be part of the development and the housing, and that includes people who may appear to have peripheral roles, but in fact have very important ones like maintenance and cleaning. Everyone must feel that they have a value. And next slide, please. everyone being able to relate to others so that there's not just two-way relationships going on here, but a network of support. And opportunities to contribute through sharing knowledge, perhaps of crafts, history, whatever it may be, and the retention and sharing with others of important objects. Our work shows that when these requirements are met, older people and carers feel a greater sense of belonging and being valued, find more purpose and meaning in life, and are quite simply healthier and happier. It also strongly indicates significantly higher staff retention where relational care is practiced, and consequent savings on recruitment and induction become available for improved conditions of service. But I can't go into that. Time is running out, and that's another story. So final slide, please. And finally, for now, because our story is a continuing one, we're working to disseminate these ideas, get them embedded in policy, practice, and the interpretation of CQC regulations. We hope to gain much greater recognition of the benefits to everyone of relational care, as well as to a whole society which needs radical change without major cost. And that was my final slide. Thank you, Sally. Because this is a work in progress, it has the potential to be developed in informal as well as formal care settings, in domiciliary care, in types of housing we haven't yet looked at. There's many directions in which we could go with the time and money. That's always a point. And I hope we'd all like to know, what do you think? How might relational care and its concept be applied to the area in which you're involved? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was great. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So we are now going to move on to the Q&A session. So thank you for everybody who's posted some questions in our Q&A box. And we are going to be joined today for the Q&A session by Dr. Manik Gopinath, who is a lecturer at the Open University and co-chair of the Center for Aging and Biographical Studies. She's also co-author of the Open University research, which we just discussed today, the value and practice of relational care with older people. So Manik's expertise and interests are in the intersection of aging, place, and well-being, and the intimate and family ties of older adults. The overall line of inquiry in Manik's research interest is how best to develop and operationalize relational frameworks that acknowledge and are sensitive to values and processes in diverse aging environments. Manik's research activity currently also includes the Dunhill Medical Trust funded project, which should be well known by our members, the Amar Bari Amar Jibon research, which she is leading on. And it's a project which focuses on the housing and health inequalities of Bangladeshi elders in East London boroughs of Hackney, Newham, and Tower Hamlets. Great. So I'm going to start with a question by Wendy Twist, which is a question for you, Maria. Given that not many older people will be able to live in co-housing arrangements, do you think the principles that you described could be applied to mainstream housing? Do you know of any examples, models yet where this has been tried? You're muted, Maria.
Yeah, far more older people ought to be able to live in senior co-housing. The question is, I've been writing about this just today. It's a question of physical and design as well as social intention. In other words, if you live along a long ribbon street and everybody's got cars parked outside, it's actually quite difficult to recognize your neighbors, to build up any kind of intimacy with neighbors, even if you live there a long time. And certainly quite difficult for anyone in the street to spot if you haven't got up one morning. Whereas if you were in a, say, I don't know, a cul-de-sac or a circle development, which, I mean, it's very much the design that many co-housing groups have gone for, you would be able to see more easily without intruding on people. And that is quite possible that you've got this sort of physical arrangement in housing arrangements that are not co-housing, and where people have lived there for a long time. They know the people next door. They will know if so-and-so's ill and will be ready to help out. Very perfectly possible. I don't know of any arrangements like that at all. And I mean, I guess what we're talking about is the unintentional co-housing as well as intentional co-housing. But who knows? That's, I mean, the very fact that I don't know of any examples to tell you about shows the need for senior co-housing.
Thanks, Maria. Jim Manick, yeah, Jim, you'd like to?
Oh, sorry, shall I just to add a thought to that, actually, that as researchers, as the problem with social research is that we it's very hard to find perfect control groups, as if you could have a scheme like New Ground that was otherwise physically identical. That would be great, but not co-housing without the social commitment. There was I moved to Bristol a couple of years ago, but I was living in southeast London in Lewisham, and round the corner there was a scheme going up by One Housing, I think it was, and it looked from the plans like it would pass physically as co-housing. It had the same kind of shared facilities and a common space. And I was fascinated to get in touch with that group, and I kind of moved away and lost the opportunity. But it's a question always in my mind about what kind of a community might be enabled purely by the design. But at present we don't know the answers to that. It certainly wouldn't be co-housing to the same level, but it's interesting to know what it would be and what might be achieved.
Thank you. Yes, Jenny.
I'd just like to mention here almshouses. They represent a very interesting model in terms of design. They're often designed around a courtyard or a communal area, but each person has their own house. There isn't time for me to say very much about it now, but if anyone's interested in how almshouses function, and they have functioned for well over 1,000 years, go to the Almshouses Association website. It's very interesting.
Can I just come in there? The Tudor Trust that helped us establish New Ground were first looking at almshouses. They'd formed a 21st century almshouse committee and were looking at the design because they were architects, etc. And then they decided that actually the almshouse model generally that they visited all around the country did not deliver what they were looking for, which was agency and autonomy by older people, because the people who lived in them didn't even have proper tenancy rights, and they certainly didn't govern them themselves. They were governed by boards of worthies who were trustees and who decided what was good for them.
That's certainly not my experience, so that would be a very interesting conversation. We've obviously looked at different examples.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, Sally has just posted a link in our in the chat box with more information about almshouses. So if you're interested, you can follow that link. I'm going to move to the next question from Henrietta.
Can I just say there, Jeremy?
Yes,
I think, I mean, where I live, where there's loads and loads of sheltered housing developments, and a lot of lonely people in them. Because they're not intentional communities. There's no dynamism for organizing. They were dependent on a manager. The manager's now peripatetic, and different ones come in each day. There's no community development as the basis for that, and it's a very big loss. And their communal room on the river, beautiful room, is always empty.
Yeah. Yeah, this I think. I mean, if I move to the next question, which is really about Henrietta is interested to understand more on tenure, especially maintaining integrity of community, and how are leaseholds dealt if a resident dies or leaves. Anyone in particular would like to comment on that?
Is that me again, probably?
Yeah, did you want to go first? I've got a couple of thoughts, but
you go first, Jim.
Well, speaking about the other schemes, I'll let Maria speak for New Ground. It's potentially more problematic at co-housing than seems to be the case in practice. I was told by one of the other groups, I think my understanding is that they'd written into the leaseholds that conditionally that it was a requirement to take part in the community, and it's regular events and eating together weekly. Some members were concerned about how that would actually be enforced in practice and whether it could be legally enforced. But in practice, that community's been going for around 20 years now, and they've recently had a new young family moved in who are very keen and the most energetic of the whole community in terms of getting stuck in and taking part. So thus far in practice, it hasn't been a problem. At one of the self-managed scheme that was built by McCarthy and Stone originally that I mentioned, it very much is a problem. They have no control over who moves in, and there's been 2 instances previously of families trying to dump a parent there in a scheme for whom it's just not suitable at the level of care that they need, and it's been very difficult to either stop that happening or turn it around. So yes, in cases of communities that were not established as intentional communities, it's very problematic.
Where New Ground is concerned, I mean, we've had our first death, as I told you. Shirley died last November, and probate has still not been sorted. But we have candidates from our non-resident members group ready and willing to buy that flat. And that was an agreement that Shirley agreed with her sons. So that should move quite smoothly, though it is not enforceable by law. Mm-hmm. Where a social rental tenant is concerned, we are fortunately not subject to local authority nominations. If we were, we would be seeking a local authority that understood what we were trying to do and was sympathetic to enabling our own choice of from the social renters that we have in our non-resident group, who are all part of the community already, they're not living there. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how many local authorities would accept that. I have known of schemes where local authorities have said, no, you'll take anybody we send you. And that can wreck a co-housing community, particularly one of all single women who need each other more than, say, a family-based one does. So it's very important that they have a membership process, and they have a buddying system for non-resident members. They have 6 months to join. The whole community has to agree that they should become a member. It's important that everybody signs up to the core values. Mm-hmm. And if somebody were just imposed on them by a social landlord or by a local authority, it could wreck it.
Thank you, Maria.
Yes, oh, sorry, I'm very aware we're cutting Jenny and Manik, but just to quickly add, because somebody asked in the chat as well about tenure, and something that I completely forgot to say or to emphasize with the housing co-op. I think that's where housing co-ops can be quite strong. The co-op in Liverpool is social rent, and yet controlled and owned by the co-op and by nobody else, and controlled by its members. And when you move into that co-op from a waiting list, you have to sign up you have to be eligible not just for the housing, but you have to sign up as a member of the co-op. And although it's not enforceable that you have to be actively involved, membership does involve more than simply passively receiving social housing.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. There was a question in the Q&A box earlier on. It was about cooperative and co-housing communities. Basically, what is the main difference between a housing cooperative and a co-housing community? I think I can't see it in the. Yes, it's been answered. Sorry, it's been answered by Maria in writing already.
Yes, I mean, people should move to the answered box.
Answered box.
Yeah. See the answer to that.
Yeah, I see you've been busy answering some questions there, Maria. That's great. I'm just conscious we only have about 3 minutes left, and I was wondering if Manik, if you wanted to pass a message in particular, or if there was anything you wanted to raise before the end of this session.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to come in. I was thinking about the first question that we discussed about, can we form realistically more intentional communities? I don't know. It would be great to be able to live in one of them as we grow older, I think. But the mainstream provision is also here to stay. And that is where I think the work that we have, Jenny and ourselves have done at the Open University, is something we'd like to extend. It is very much done within the care settings. But almost listening to everybody today, I can see the value of it in terms of those principles of relationships, of sheltered housing, extra care housing, sort of recognizing and bringing in, embedding the role of the community. And that extends from, your local partners to volunteers to families. And also, as Jim mentioned, I think more examples are there in international settings, how the design works, where you bring the community in. And the other issue is there is for some, there'll be a progressive sense of, health declining, and people start somewhere and end up somewhere. And there's always a need for support. And I think the concept that we are it is not a new concept. And I'm sure just like in care settings, people are already doing that. There are people in housing who are also doing it. But it's also recognizing that keeping those good things that Maria and Jim have said, how do you do it? How do you keep people's agency and autonomy alive and reciprocity alive in a sheltered housing setting? How do you do it in an extra care setting? What does that mean to bring people on board and do things? I think it's slightly different, but if it can be done in care settings, extra care housing and supportive housing is easy peasy, I would say. It's just like imagining big, and somebody had mentioned something about age-friendly communities. I think it's very important to think about co-locating facilities. What if you have dementia and you're in an extra care housing? Can you have something, the park, something intergenerational just outside as you get outside? And so you participate, so your opportunities are slightly different, but you participate in that even though visually or through a smile or something. So I think we just want to, Jenny and myself just wanted to insert ourselves here and think loudly and think through as to how principles can be brought into the more mainstream supportive housing scenario. And we'd welcome discussions around this. From
something very interesting in the chat box from Nicholas Falk about, and there's a book, Sustainable Urban Neighborhood, Building the 21st Century Home. That looks interesting. I shall get it, Nicholas. And saying that the best new neighborhoods are to be found in the Netherlands.
Yes, there you go.
Great. Thank you, Maria, for raising that as well. Thanks, Manik, for making very, very good points here. So yeah, thank you. I see that people have been busy in the chat box. So just to let you know, we'll be sharing the recording, including all the messages in the chat box in a couple of days. So you can access all these reports and everything that is we've linked in the chat box. Great. So yeah, I think unfortunately that's already the end. Time is going too fast. So maybe if we just go quickly, very quickly around the table for one last message. So if I start with Maria, is there any last word you'd like to say?
Well, I see we have a lot of local authorities represented here. Mm-hmm. Local authorities, you have a role in helping social co-housing to happen for seniors. You have a key role. If you look at what they do in the Netherlands, they really facilitate senior co-housing there and mutual support among older people as a way of saving public expenditure at the very least. Mm-hmm. You can do it too.
Thank you, Maria. Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd echo that. I think for local authorities, all of these different schemes need support, and not just as what's happened in Bristol, where the local authority gives scraps of land and places that it can't develop itself, but to really support collaborative housing as part of major housing schemes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jim. And Jenny and Manik?
Well, very briefly, I'd just like to say I think it's important to be aspirational. Mm. We understand the real value of the sort of housing that Maria and Jim have been describing. We can see, it works really well for people. But I think we can be aspirational in transferring some of that learning, well, quite a lot of it, in fact, into other types of accommodation for older people in particular. And I hope we can do some of that, all of us together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jenny. And Manik, would you like to say one last word?
No, just echoing everybody. I'd just say that we'd like to hear from people, actually, to see how we extend ideas of care and mutuality and reciprocity into supportive housing, which is not intentional. Mm-hmm. So I'll leave it like that. Thank you very much, Jerome.
So if anybody in our audience would like to reach out to our speakers, so if you haven't written down their email addresses, don't hesitate to contact the Housing Lin. If you contact us at info@housinglin.org.uk, we'll make sure to put you in touch with our speakers today. Great. So it was really a fantastic session. It's going too quickly. There's too much information, but it's fantastic. And thank you also to our audience for your questions. Sorry we didn't have a chance to answer all of them. But yeah, I just would like to thank our speakers again for this fantastic session. And just a quick note about our next session. So exceptionally, next week, our happy hour is not going to be held on Tuesday, but it's going to be held on Wednesday. So it's going to be Wednesday, the 25th of October from 4 p.m. And we will focus on better housing choices for people with a learning disability or autism. So this happy hour session will outline the recent Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act 2023. And we'll also explore recent research conducted by the Housing Lin for the Learning Disability and Autism Housing Network into the state of the supported housing market. So Sally should have posted the link to this events page in the chat box. So please book your place, and also please remember to complete the very short feedback form, which will appear on your screen when we close this session. So thank you again, everybody, and looking forward to seeing you next week. All right. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.